Mob historians state Tony Accardo's reputation inside the Chicago outfit hardened early, and his nickname followed him for the rest of his life. One set of accounts says the handle, Joe Batters, came after a brutal beating carried out with a baseball bat, and when Jack McGurn relayed it to Al Capone, the boss praised the violence and the name stuck. From that point, he moved in the same orbit as top Capone-era killers, working alongside men like McGurn, Albert Anselmi, and John Scalise. Investigators also believed he traveled with that inner circle when Chicago's interests reached beyond Illinois. In that telling, he was not a loud public boss then. He was a reliable man for heavy work, and his value came from discipline and follow-through. Our sources state the late 1920s marked his first widely cited out-of-town hit, tied to a New York killing that made national underworld history. In 1928, authorities believed he and other Chicago gunmen went to Brooklyn to murder Frankie Yale, Capone's former friend turned enemy. The shooting was remembered as a milestone in New York gang violence, with a Thompson submachine gun cited as being used in a major city mob hit in a way that drew attention. Through the 1930s, he kept operating as an enforcer, while the city's gangs reshuffled around money and fear. When the Chicago Crime Commission issued its first public enemies list in 1931, his name appeared high on it, and it reinforced what police already believed about his role. That same year, Capone went to prison for tax charges, and he shifted to serving the new leadership without hesitation. Mafia documents describe his rise continuing under Frank Nitti after Capone's imprisonment, with a clear jump in status early in the 1930s. In 1933, Nitti made him a capo over a street crew said to include around a dozen soldiers, a promotion that placed him among the top layer of the organization. It also positioned him to benefit when older leadership began falling under major prosecutions. In the early 1940s, the Hollywood extortion case pulled key figures into court trouble, and as those men went down, he and other survivors climbed. By the mid-1940s, accounts say a power contest existed between him and a rival known as Dago, Lawrence Mangiano. Before any internal vote could settle it, Mangiano was ambushed and murdered in a passing car attack that left his body shredded with shotgun pellets and pistol rounds. With that rival eliminated, he became the top man in 1945 and quickly demonstrated how he handled resistance. In 1946, his people approached James Reagan, owner of the Continental Press Wire service that supplied racing results to bookmakers, and offered to buy him out. Reagan refused, then made a choice that sealed his fate in the eyes of underworld leadership. He took the proposal to law enforcement. Not long after, he was killed. And authorities later cited poisoning as part of what ended his life, even while police protection was present. The outfit moved in immediately and took control of the wire service, and the speed of that takeover became part of the legend in crime circles. By 1950, a federal crime commission publicly recognized him as boss of Chicago's syndicate, even as he kept his personal life quieter than many headline-grabbing predecessors. That low profile did not mean weakness, it meant fewer openings for enemies. Mob historians state his official reign did not end from street pressure, but from tax attention that forced a change in the front-facing hierarchy. In 1957, an internal revenue investigation pushed him to step back and hand the title to Sam Giancana, while staying available as an advisor. Many in law enforcement believed he remained the strategic brain behind the organization for years after, guiding decisions while other bosses served as public faces. One such figurehead later identified by investigators was Joe Aiuppa, who rose into the top position in the early 1970s. In that view, the leadership structure became layered: the visible boss, the quiet advisor, and the crews carrying orders out on the ground. The arrangement reduced noise while keeping control stable. It also kept outsiders guessing about who truly had final authority. Aiuppa's story, as presented in those accounts, was built around limited schooling and deep criminal experience. He was born December 1, 1907, in Melrose Park, Illinois, and an FBI report later described him as attending school only through the 3rd grade. His work history included greenhouse labor and driving jobs before he purchased the Turf Lounge in Cicero in 1930. That same year, he partnered in a company that manufactured gambling equipment, tying him to the business side of illegal play. The same federal material linked him to the Dillinger and Alvin Karpis circles in the early 1930s, then placed him inside the Capone organization under Nitti in 1935 as muscle. Over time, he took control of criminal activity in Cicero and the western suburbs, and gained a reputation for being armed and dangerous, with murder allegations attached. Mafia documents describe him as being recognized in 1958 as the boss of the Strip in Cicero, a row of illegal gambling and strip joints tied to local power. During the Senate McClellan Committee investigations into labor union infiltration, he was called to testify and repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment, a refusal pattern that became part of his public profile. In 1962, he picked up a new nickname after being arrested, returning from a Kansas hunting trip with roughly 500 dead doves, far above the legal limit. Accounts describe him as vicious and loyal, but not known for eloquence, and his path upwards stalled for a period, even as he remained in the top layer. The opening came in 1971, when the sitting boss, Felix Milwaukee Phil Aldericio, was convicted of bank fraud. With Accardo's support, Aiuppa was selected to fill the vacancy. In that telling, the two most powerful men in Chicago in 1971 were Aiuppa in title and Accardo in true influence. Mob historians state the Las Vegas story in these notes pivots next to two Chicago-born figures who operated in different lanes: Frank, Lefty Rosenthal, and Tony the Ant Spilotro. The two knew each other from the same neighborhoods growing up, yet their roles diverged. Rosenthal, Jewish, could not be a made man and functioned as an associate tied to gambling operations. Spilotro was a full member of the organization, trusted for enforcement and fear control. The accounts frame their early years as parallel tracks that later collided in Las Vegas. At the exact time, licensing pressure made one man desperate for legitimacy, and the other man arrived as heat. Their friendship did not remove the underlying structure. One was useful for numbers and management, the other for discipline and violence. The city became the stage where those roles intensified. Our sources state Rosenthal was born in Chicago in 1929, son of a produce wholesaler, and he rejected the family business for sports and wagering. At 19, he went to work as a clerk for Bill Kaplan at the Angel Kaplan Sports Service and developed odds-making skills quickly. Over time, he gained a reputation as an elite handicapper and a strong earner for illegal gambling operations tied to Chicago. That success brought attention, and in 1960, his name appeared on Chicago Crime Commission lists of known gamblers, pushing him to leave town. He moved to Miami in 1961, aiming for less visibility, but the reputation followed him. He was called before the McClellan Committee, invoked the Fifth Amendment dozens of times, and then got swept into an FBI crackdown that hit bookies and players. Miami police adding their own pressure after that crackdown, arresting him repeatedly until his daily life became unstable. In 1962, he was indicted in a case involving an attempted bribe of a college basketball player. He maintained innocence, but entered a no-contest plea. He stayed active in Miami despite the heat, and in 1964, his old friend Spilotro arrived, adding another layer of federal attention, since the newcomer was viewed as a murder suspect in Chicago. By 1966, Rosenthal decided he had reached his limit in Florida and looked for a place where gambling men could operate with less constant harassment. He chose Las Vegas, arriving around 1966 and buying into the Rose Bowl sportsbook after settling in. Not long after, he relocated toward the Strip and into the Stardust orbit. His status rose fast, and he began aiming for higher, more official management roles. Our sources state his private life shifted in 1968 when he met Jerry McGee, a woman who had moved to Las Vegas from California and worked inside casino-adjacent nightlife as a showgirl and cocktail waitress, with hustling in the mix. The relationship is described as immediate on his side, and he pushed to marry while she hesitated. Her hesitation faded after he placed a large stash of cash and jewelry in a safe deposit box for her protection if the marriage failed. They married the following year, and for a short period, the arrangement seemed to work. Then in 1970, he was indicted again for bookmaking, the exact kind of case that could damage his eligibility for a casino management license. The notes emphasized two threats to licensing: gambling arrests and known association with organized crime figures. In 1971, while he tried to keep himself clean enough to rise inside a major property, the arrival of Spilotro in Las Vegas hit like a personal and professional warning at the same time. Mob historians state Spilotro was born May 19, 1938, fourth of 6 sons, to Italian immigrant parents Patsy and Antoinette, and he grew up around a family restaurant that later became a hangout for outfit figures. The accounts say there is no evidence his father was involved in crime, yet the son rejected that life and gravitated to the street. In school, he built a reputation for bullying and intimidation, and later narratives connect part of his image to small stature and a hard temper. The nickname the Ant is presented as disputed, with explanations ranging from being short for Anthony, to press invention, to a Chicago cop insult that stuck. He disliked the handle, regardless of its origin. After his father died, he was thrown out of school in 1955 for continued misconduct, and then lived on the street full-time, stealing cars and robbing stores while earning a reputation for viciousness. Sources state his big early recruiter was Mad Sam DeStefano, a loan shark and outfit-connected enforcer described as unstable, cruel, and effective as an earner. DeStefano was said to favor an ice pick and to shift methods depending on mood, with a willingness to torture and kill that terrified both enemies and associates. He also had a talent for spotting young street predators, and he recruited Spilotro as an enforcer when the young man was around 18. On January 15, 1961, he married Nancy Stewart, born in Milwaukee in 1938, then living in Chicago when they met. One account claims he was thrown out of Belgium during the honeymoon for possession of burglary tools. Back in Chicago, he kept working as one of DeStefano's heavies until a high-profile internal offense created an opening. In May of 1962, 2 low-level criminals killed outfit-connected men, known as the Scavallo brothers, without permission, and they did it in a residential area the bosses had marked off limits for murders. That breach demanded a response. Mafia documents describe Spilotro taking that assignment and using it to elevate himself. He and his associates captured Billy McCarthy, one of the offenders, but still needed the name and location of the other target, Jimmy Maraglia. McCarthy resisted under beating and threats, and the notes describe torture escalating until information was forced out through a vice that compressed his skull, ending in a moment where an eyeball popped out and resistance collapsed. The 2 men were later found dead in the trunk of an abandoned car, remembered in underworld talk as the M&M murders. After that, he was said to become a made man, with his status rising sharply. In 1963, he and an associate, Chuck Grimaldi, allegedly lured real estate broker Leo Foreman, one of DeStefano's collectors, into a trap at the home of DeStefano's brother Mario. The notes describe Foreman being beaten, dragged to a cellar, then tortured by DeStefano with a hammer and an ice pick, followed by a gunshot, and his body later found in an abandoned car trunk. The violence in these accounts is not used as decoration. It is presented as the method that built his name. Our sources state by 1964, with homicides stacking and pressure rising in Chicago, the Spilotros spent time in Miami, where they had acquaintances including Rosenthal. In 1966, he and his wife adopted their only child, an infant son named Vincent. As the 1960s ended and the 1970s began, Chicago bosses initiated a cash skimming operation tied to Las Vegas casinos under their influence. The protective structure described here was clear. Install a frontman as owner. Place Rosenthal in management to oversee operations, and keep access to count rooms so cash could be removed before it was entered as revenue. That setup created a second risk. Someone inside Las Vegas could try to steal from the hidden take or disrupt the system. The notes described the outfit wanting a local enforcer whose reputation alone discouraged theft, and whose response would be fast if intimidation failed. They did not need to search for that person. The name was already in their ranks. He was sent to Las Vegas as the answer. Mob historians state the year 1971 is framed as both a cultural moment and an operational moment for Las Vegas. The notes mention popular songs on the charts, American soldiers still fighting in Vietnam, and Clark County's population around 275,000. Law enforcement was split between a city department and a county sheriff's department, with the Strip under the county's jurisdiction. Tourism boomed. Female card dealers were hired at major properties as a milestone, and more than 7 million tourists visited, bringing heavy cash flow. That money attracted criminals, and the city was treated as open territory by multiple crime families. Hidden ownership and control existed across several major casinos, with Teamsters Pension Fund financing repeatedly cited as a key foundation for development. Yet within that open city environment, the accounts say one organization held dominant influence: Chicago. Locals and visitors later wondered what it felt like to work inside that system, and these notes answer with stories from 3 unnamed casino insiders. Our sources state 3 former supervisors or managers described the era through incidents rather than speeches, and to protect identities, they were given the names Mario, Mickey, and Sammy. One incident took place late at night in the Crown Room of the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton. Around 3 in the morning, when a band from San Francisco on stage started insulting a guest described as a heavyweight casino figure. After repeated comments about his bald head and the woman with him, the insulted man made a call on a house phone. The hotel president, living in a suite, arrived within minutes, wearing pajamas under an overcoat, and ordered the band to pack up and leave, not just the property, but the city. The next day, another call went to the musicians' union, and the band suddenly could not secure bookings and folded soon after. Years later, one band member said there were no hard feelings, and they considered themselves lucky to have left in one piece once they learned who they had mocked. The point of the story is simple. A single phone call could launch or end a career. Mafia documents describe how cheaters and debtors were handled differently depending on the property and the amount involved. Mickey said his strip employer preferred not to do extreme beatings, viewing that as risky, since a damaged cheater might come back armed or go to authorities. The priority was getting the money back and making sure the person never returned. Even so, when a suspected cheater got marched into a back room, the fear was real, and most offered to surrender quickly. In one case, a man who had taken around $10,000 was told he could settle it by going to a roulette table and staying until he lost everything, with the understanding he was being watched. He paid the money back, added an extra $1,000, and vanished from their world. Sammy described a downtown approach that escalated when the amount was substantial, with injuries severe enough to require crutches or casts, and he emphasized that none of those cheaters ever returned seeking revenge. Mario said his strip employer had a back room they jokingly called a torture chamber, with some cheaters leaving with broken limbs, yet he also emphasized a bigger day-to-day problem: deadbeats who lost heavily and then failed to pay markers. Our sources state the deadbeat process was described as a step ladder. First, a cordial call from an executive, framed like customer service, ending with a reminder to pay the marker to avoid embarrassment. That solved most cases. If it did not, a personal visit followed, and the debtor paid. Then the narrative shifts to the skim, described openly by all 3 insiders as cash removed from count rooms before official counting. At first, it focused on table games, then later extended to slot revenue through manipulation of weight measurements after coin bags were emptied, with scales adjusted to show lower weight, so a percentage went unrecorded. The managers described it as money that effectively never existed on paper. They also stressed that many managers knew it was happening without being directly involved, and it was considered dangerous to show interest in who took the money or where it went. Sammy recalled a mid-1970s incident during a trip to Phoenix for a funeral when a rental car employee told him the FBI had been asking how long he would have the car and where he would be staying. An interaction he read as suspicion that he was a courier. He went on with his trip and heard nothing further, but the memory stayed. Mob historians state the insiders largely described the wise guys around the casinos as workable, as long as an employee followed two rules: do your job and do not get curious. Mario said many of them were generous and sometimes helped regular employees with money or personal problems. Sammy said he had little direct interaction but had no trouble and even liked most of them, while Mickey echoed the same idea. Crossing them or getting inquisitive could bring consequences. Then another voice enters through a radio personality, True Hawkins, who offered memories of the era, along with stories from his father, who started at the Riviera as a cashier in the mid-1950s and rose to manage the casino cage. He described a practice where a locked box of $100 bills would be placed on a shelf by a back door, then later replaced by an empty box without explanation, and employees who noticed did not ask questions. He described two faces in the same world, men who could be kind and generous, and men who could turn violent quickly if crossed. Hawkins also told a story of a heavy suspected in multiple murders, arranging for an employee's sick child and parents to be flown to UCLA for treatment at no cost to the family, informing the father only after everything was set. The help was real, and so was the warning behind it. Loyalty was rewarded, disrespect was punished. Our sources state Hawkins also encountered Rosenthal in the 1970s through overlapping work in radio and television. He described him as extremely charming in person, while also recognizing he was not someone to offend. He recalled Las Vegas then as a city that was growing fast, yet still felt like a small town in daily life, a place with constant activity, but familiar rhythms. The accounts close this section with that split view. A booming tourist economy built on entertainment and gambling, alongside hidden systems of control, money movement, and fear discipline. The stories do not argue that every employee was involved. They argue that many employees learned what not to notice. They do not claim every wise guy was violent every day. They claim the capacity for violence was understood and kept order. They do not portray the city as only corruption. They portray it as a place where legitimacy and criminal power overlapped in the same buildings and sometimes in the same conversations. That overlap is the environment Rosenthal tried to navigate for licensing and reputation. And it is the environment Spilotro entered to enforce discipline around the money. A local describes Las Vegas in the mid-1960s who worked behind the bar in clubs and casinos through the 1980s. And his memories describe a town that still felt small in daily life. He said most people understood there were connected men around, and the safest move was to mind your work and avoid crossing lines. He also said he stayed away from the gambling side on purpose and kept his contact with wise guys limited. Even with that distance, he saw how discipline worked inside a casino when someone tried to steal. His version of old Las Vegas includes the bright parts too, with entertainers drifting through lounges after shows and treating workers like workers, not targets. He remembered meeting major headliners in casual, ordinary moments that did not match the reputation the city later earned. One night on a graveyard shift, he walked in and saw security escorting a dealer into a break room, and other employees cleared out fast. Not long after, he heard screams coming from inside, loud enough to carry down the corridor. The dealer had been caught hiding chips in his tie, and it was treated as a long-running theft, not a first mistake. The punishment was described as severe and deliberate, aimed at ending the theft and warning everyone else at once. Afterward, the dealer was pushed out and word was sent around so other casinos would not hire him. In that telling, the lesson was not subtle, and the goal was to make employees think twice before trying to take what was not theirs. Mob historians state the same era also carried a different kind of power, where generosity from a celebrity could change a worker's life overnight without publicity. Joe described a story widely repeated among casino staff as true, set in the late 1960s when Frank Sinatra was appearing at Caesar's Palace. A cocktail waitress was dealing with her daughter's severe burns from a fire while trying to keep working as a single mother. Sinatra heard about it and had the waitress brought to his suite, and her first reaction was fear and uncertainty about what was expected. He asked what she earned in a year, including tips, then had a check written for that amount on the spot, and told her to take a year off to care for her child, with the job waiting when she returned. Joe presented it as the kind of moment workers remembered for decades, part of why many staff felt the city had a human side alongside its hard rules. That was the Las Vegas Tony Spilotro entered in 1971, a place growing fast with tourists arriving constantly by plane and car. Families came for sunshine, food, reasonable prices, entertainment, and gambling, while a separate population came to make money in ways that did not show up on postcards. Soon after moving in with his wife Nancy and their son Vincent, he introduced himself publicly as a businessman. He opened a jewelry and gift shop inside Circus, using his wife's maiden name to lower attention and operating under the name Anthony Stewart Limited. Concessions inside major casinos were hard to obtain, and casino rules warned that doing business with known organized crime figures could threaten a license. Even so, Circus owner Jay Sarno allowed the shop, and the notes tie that decision to Sarno's large Teamster loan financing. Local FBI agents knew he had arrived almost immediately, and their Chicago counterparts had already alerted them once the family started the move west. Agents expected he would keep a low profile and function as a minor helper around Frank Rosenthal, since the larger goal in town was steady profit and reduced attention. That expectation did not hold. He moved quickly into loan sharking, targeting the daily cash stress of a 24-hour service economy where workers relied on small wages and tips and still came up short before payday. In this environment, lending money and collecting it created a constant revenue stream for someone who had cash and intimidation. Another man already dominated that lane in Las Vegas, Gaspare Anadetto Speciale, known widely as Jasper. Jasper had connections that visiting mobsters respected, and meetings with him were treated as formal, with public signs of deference. Spilotro did not try to push Jasper out immediately, and the notes describe him showing outward respect, while quietly taking a share of the loan sharking business, without starting a public fight. That approach paid off when Jasper went to federal prison in 1976 on a racketeering conviction. With Jasper gone, Spilotro stepped into the top position in loan sharking in Las Vegas without a headline war. His rise in that lane is described as matching what Chicago preferred: low noise, no public spectacle, and control through routine. At the same time, his move into Las Vegas life did not erase his Chicago exposure. A past murder case returned to his doorstep and pulled local law enforcement into a test of loyalty inside the system. Our sources state that in August of 1972, he was indicted in Chicago for the 1963 murder of Leo Foreman, and Las Vegas learned about it through a phone call that carried a warning. Sergeant Charles Lee, a former Chicago officer working in Las Vegas, was contacted by a Chicago homicide detective who said 2 detectives were flying in that night to make the arrest and wanted local backup. The Chicago detective also warned Lee to be careful who heard the news, saying informants claimed someone in Lee's department was on the outfit payroll. After the arrest and booking, a covert jail watch was set to see who might move toward him. It did not take long for Officer John DeMoss from the Organized Crime and Homicide Unit to sign into the jail with his niece, claiming he wanted to give her a tour. Once inside, he stopped at Spilotro's cell, spoke with him, contacted his attorney, delivered a message from Rosenthal, and began setting up bail, then resigned, rather than face discipline, and was quickly hired into a supervisory job at the Rosenthal-managed Stardust. He made bail and began shuttling between Las Vegas and Chicago to handle his defense while keeping his Vegas interests alive. The major fear around that trial was the co-defendant, Sam DiStefano, who planned to represent himself and was also dying of terminal cancer. Rumors circulated that DiStefano might seek a deal to avoid dying in prison, and any deal would put others at risk. Attempts to separate the cases failed, and the notes say Spilotro turned to internal power rather than courtroom procedure. 5 weeks before trial, DiStefano was hit with shotgun blasts and died, with the shooter listed as unknown. In June of 1973, Spilotro was acquitted, but the attention did not fade. It intensified. A later press study described Las Vegas suffering a surge of gangland-style killings during the years after his arrival, with multiple executives attacked, a lawyer killed by an explosive in his car, a loan shark victim disappearing, and another boss beaten and left crippled. And the notes emphasized that even when proof was unclear, many people believed Spilotro was tied to the violence. In 1974, he was indicted again, this time in a federal case that alleged fraud against the Central States Teamsters Pension Fund, totaling roughly $1.4 million. Co-defendants included Joseph "Joey the Clown" Lombardo, identified as a senior Chicago figure, and Alan Dorfman, described as a key broker between Teamsters money and organized crime transactions. The case was complex, built on business records and multiple companies, and prosecutors counted on a cooperating witness, a young Chicago businessman named Dan Seifert, to explain it clearly to a jury. Before the trial, Seifert, his wife, and their small son went to his plastics factory early one morning, and masked gunmen chased him through the plant and killed him with a shotgun blast to the head. The murder frightened other witnesses, and when the trial arrived, the testimony collapsed under pressure and intimidation. Spilotro was dropped from the case, and the remaining defendants were acquitted, reinforcing the idea that cooperating against him could get a person killed. Mob documents described the mid-1970s producing a string of suspicious deaths that kept his name in circulation even when cases fell apart. In June of 1973, William Red Klim, a Caesars Palace employee, was shot and killed in a racebook parking lot, and the notes list multiple theories, tied either to illegal bookmaking investigations involving Rosenthal, to knowledge of Teamsters pension fraud, or to loan sharking tribute disputes. He was charged later, yet the case collapsed when witnesses could not or would not identify the killer. Another killing involved Marty Buccieri, a Caesars pit boss related to Chicago underboss Fiore Buccieri, who was said to have helped arrange pension fund loans for Alan Glick's casino group, and later demanded a $30,000 finder's fee, including threats, then was found shot to death. Investigators suspected Spilotro, while others pointed to weapon details and argued that conclusion. The notes then shift to Tamara Rand, an investor and associate of Glick who claimed she had bought a 5% interest, filed suit and risked exposing hidden interests in court, then was murdered at her San Diego home on November 9, 1975, with a small-caliber weapon that matched the type associated with Spilotro crews in those accounts. Yet no charge was filed due to lack of evidence, and later claims about a strong alibi were treated by experienced investigators as doubtful. Glick faced heavy public scrutiny after Rand's death due to their relationship, and he issued statements denying any role in the murder and denying connections to organized crime. Those denials were widely questioned in law enforcement circles and within the city's rumor network. Spilotro, through counsel, also issued a denial of any ties to Glick's operation, and those denials were also treated skeptically by people who believed they understood how the casinos were structured behind the scenes. At the same time, another pressure channel opened from outside Nevada. A California officer named Bob Gatewood received a call from a close friend, a retired Marine who had become Glick's bodyguard in an upscale coastal area. The bodyguard said he was uneasy about the people around Glick and felt compelled to report what he was seeing, including guest lists and travel and social activity. Gatewood entered the information into a national organized crime intelligence database, and agencies across the country began calling him, including Nevada regulators, and the bodyguard fed him information for about 2 years, while growing increasingly fearful for his family, checking for bugs and wiretaps, then ending cooperation after changing jobs. Spilotro's income did not depend only on loans and casino influence, and the notes describe a burglary and fencing network that became a full operation. Burglars working under him were called the hole-in-the-wall gang due to their method of entering buildings through walls or roofs, and the work expanded to hotel rooms and private homes as well. Jewelry and cash were primary targets, and crew size shifted by job, sometimes 1 or 2 men, sometimes 6 or 7, with extra help brought in from Chicago for major scores. Profits were split, with a portion sent back to Chicago leadership, and overhead included paying insiders such as valets, maids, desk clerks, and others who provided information about targets. One scam used valet conversations to identify wealthy guests, learn their plans, locate addresses through car paperwork for locals, obtain hotel names for visitors, and estimate how long a vehicle would be parked, then used that window to carry out burglaries and move stolen goods using the victim's own car. The notes also describe a broader control practice. Other criminals in Las Vegas had to seek his approval and pay a share of profits as a street tax. And ignoring the protocol risked consequences far more severe than any licensing fine. By 1975, his entourage expanded with the arrival of his brother John and more Chicago-connected bookies, loan sharks, burglars, and enforcers. And he shifted his base to the dunes, using the card room as an office, carrying cash for loans, running poker scams against wealthy gamblers, demanding sports bet payouts without paying losses, and cycling around regulators by briefly stepping away, sending John in under an alias, then returning until owners were forced into closed hearings where they claimed ignorance and described him as harmless and interest-free. His reach expanded into elite spaces as well, including the Las Vegas Country Club and Estates, a gated community founded by Mo Dalitz, with members drawn from professional and casino leadership circles. He first entered through friends who could sign charges for him, found that arrangement awkward, applied for membership, was rejected in June of 1976, then pushed hard enough that the committee reversed itself and admitted him. Once inside, he held meetings in dining spaces, used the card room socially and for business, and his wife Nancy became a regular presence on the tennis courts. The next move was to open the Gold Rush jewelry store off the Strip on West Sahara, designed as both a storefront and a protected base. Entry could be controlled by Buzzer, a private security firm swept for electronic surveillance and monitored alarms, and the second floor held radios, scanners monitoring police and federal channels, and watch positions for lookouts. The store was operated by Spilotro, his brother John, and a large Chicago bookie with guns kept behind the counter, and the setup was built to resist both robberies and law enforcement intrusion. The notes frame this as part of a larger focus on intelligence, including efforts to learn what law enforcement planned, to identify informants, and to use corruption, payoffs, and intimidation inside the legal system when possible. Our sources state that by March of 1978, federal investigators had enough probable cause to authorize wiretaps and electronic surveillance, and they also placed an undercover agent inside the gold rush operation. Agent Rick Bakken posed as a diamond fence using the name Rick Kalis and worked to gather information from inside the store. Despite the store's security and countermeasures, agents managed to bug the premises and tap the phones, and recordings quickly confirmed internal police corruption through the voices of Detective Joe Blasco and Sergeant Phil Leone, who were feeding Spilotro circle details about surveillance, informants, undercover identities, and vehicle descriptions, along with progress on fixing tickets and getting charges dropped. Blasco was recorded calling in updates from his police car with radio dispatch audible in the background, and the leak damage created serious strain between federal and local investigators. The same surveillance captured Spilotro coaching witnesses before grand jury appearances, taking calls from connected figures across the country, and interacting with celebrities such as Robert Conrad and Barbara McNair, with no wrongdoing claimed for the celebrity contacts themselves. The notes also trace the McNair lane through her husband, Rick Manzi, described in Chicago reporting as a minor outfit associate with heroin addiction and gambling debts at outfit-controlled casinos, followed by Manzi's unsolved murder in Las Vegas in December of 1976, shot in the heart at close range. After 79 days of wiretaps, investigators had recorded thousands of calls across hundreds of tapes, obtained search warrants for 83 locations, and executed them on June 19th. With a raid at the Gold Rush, where Spilotro ran home and delayed entry until attorney Oscar Goodman arrived, buying time for items to disappear, and even though seizures included thousands of jewelry pieces, communications gear, firearms, handcuffs, cash, confidential police reports, and large currency found in related locations and safe deposit holdings, a magistrate later ruled agents exceeded the search scope and most evidence was suppressed, followed by his placement in Nevada's Black Book, barring him from casinos, while the two rogue officers were indicted yet never tried, with one retiring for health and the other's case later dismissed. Las Vegas law enforcement took damage that spread past Nevada, and the fallout did not stay contained to one department. Other agencies began treating local police as unreliable and avoided working with them in sensitive matters. National organizations refused memberships and shut locals out of certain intelligence channels. The damage reached past street work into professional standing and access. At the same time, the city's federal office also drew scrutiny and criticism from within federal circles. The story of those years includes misconduct allegations on both sides of the badge. Starting in the late 1960s, federal circles carried talk that agents assigned to Las Vegas were accepting free meals, drinks, and other favors from casinos and individuals they were supposed to monitor. The allegation was not framed as one bad night or one exception, but as a routine that spread. Richard Crane, who led a federal organized crime strike effort in Southern California and Nevada from 1970 to 1975, treated the claims as serious. He pressed the issue up the chain and asked Washington to step in. An inspection team came to Las Vegas and stayed for weeks. The team left after chastising agents, at least in the official version of events. Mob historians state the first inspection did not end the problem and may have worsened it by normalizing the behavior. Word reached Crane that the inspectors themselves accepted free treatment while in town and left without changing the culture. Reports continued that local agents kept taking casino favors. An Internal Revenue investigator Crane trusted confirmed the allegations in blunt terms. Crane complained again and pushed for a stronger response. When he left government service in 1975, the situation still had not been fully corrected. The pattern carried forward into the next leadership period in the Vegas office. After Crane departed, the same basic claims continued, and retired leadership spoke about how the culture started and why it spread. Jack Keith, who ran the Las Vegas office from 1974 to 1977, later described the precedent being set by early leadership who ate in casinos and did not even sign checks. He framed Las Vegas as a place where corruption pressures touched everything around it. He also argued that long assignments made the problem worse, since some agents stayed in town for 10 to 15 years. He said he warned staff there was no free lunch and that the price would eventually arrive. He also believed no agent should have remained assigned there longer than about 3 years. The controversy did not stop at meals and shows, and the stakes rose once sensitive surveillance work entered the picture. When major properties were wiretapped, the captured conversations often stayed shallow, drifting through safe topics rather than useful admissions. Some agents believed the lack of results pointed to leaks, possibly coming from inside the same office. Other FBI field officers became hesitant to share information with Las Vegas colleagues for the same reason other agencies avoided the local police. Complaints again reached Washington, and another inspection was scheduled. The second review, arriving in June of 1977, was treated differently than earlier efforts. It was designed to find sources of compromise and end the leakage problem. Sources state that the June 1977 housecleaning produced measurable consequences in the Vegas federal office. Within months, roughly a dozen local agents were censured, reassigned, or pushed into early retirement. The changes were framed as necessary to restore credibility and protect intelligence. The cleanup also reduced friction with outside offices that had grown wary of sharing information. For investigators who stayed, the message was that free favors and loose information would no longer be tolerated. The renewed discipline set conditions for later operations to run with fewer internal compromises. It also signaled that the next phase would be fought with tighter control and fewer leaks. Inside the casino world, a separate set of memories described what it felt like to work for Alan Glick's corporate group while it controlled major properties. A woman later interviewed about the period is referred to here as Connie for privacy. She arrived in Las Vegas in August of 1969 and found casino work quickly. At 23, she started in payroll at the Thunderbird, then shifted into accounting, where she handled guest room, food, and beverage comps and organized credit for junkets. That position taught her the marketing and service side of casino life as well as the numbers. In 1972, she moved to Circus and built more experience in customer service and casino operations. In 1976, she took an accounting job in the corporate office inside the Stardust, and her career shifted again. She described that period as an era when customer service was treated as the main selling point, and comps were used aggressively. She recalled that food, beverage, and rooms were treated as secondary costs, while the gaming floor was treated as the true profit engine. She also described Los Angeles as a common escape point, a place where money and attention bought comfort fast. Her manager at the time, Frank Mooney, told her that her skill and reliability had been noticed above his level. He explained that Frank Rosenthal had asked to transfer her into marketing to work under Martin Black, the vice president of marketing. Mooney said he hated losing her, but described it as a rare opportunity and a better fit for her personality. She accepted and soon felt she had found the work she was meant to do. Mafia documents describe the marketing office environment as unusual even by Las Vegas standards. A girlfriend of a well-known wise guy was placed there and collected a paycheck while doing little more than personal grooming and small tasks. After about 6 months, Martin Black left and Connie stepped into his position. She described being the first female casino executive in the city at a time when decision-making roles were treated as male territory. She heard comments suggesting she advanced through sexual favors rather than competence. She shut those claims down with a blunt answer that her intelligence drove her rise, not her body. The talk faded as she proved she could do the job at a high level. Her work put her close to Rosenthal, and she was placed in charge of his weekly television show tied to the property. She described handling all aspects of production and logistics, treating it as demanding work that required precision. She said her father was her first mentor in life and described Rosenthal as her second, crediting him with giving her opportunities she believed no one else would have offered. She described him as a perfectionist who was fair, soft-spoken, and consistently respectful to her. She also said she met his wife frequently and described her as beautiful and polite in Connie's presence. In her telling, Rosenthal's respect for her mattered as much as the title on her door. Those personal details set up a moment that showed who held real authority inside the corporate structure. Connie described being sent to San Diego to do editing work connected to the first television show, then returning to the Stardust the next day. She was called into Glick's office and questioned about where she had been and who authorized the trip. He presented an ultimatum: stop doing anything Rosenthal asked or lose her job. She was a young single mother with 2 children and said the threat left her mentally frozen for the rest of the day. That evening, while leaving the property, she passed Rosenthal and several associates heading to the Moby Dick restaurant, a favored meeting spot. He greeted her, noticed her lack of her usual smile, and called her back to ask what was wrong. She told him about the confrontation with Glick and said she felt trapped. Mob historians state that what followed revealed the real chain of command in practice, not on paper. Rosenthal brought her into the Moby Dick and had a phone delivered to the table. He called Glick at home in La Jolla and made the hierarchy explicit. He told him Connie worked for him, not for Glick, and that threats toward her would end badly. He stated he ran things at the property and warned that another attempt to intimidate her would be met with broken legs. He ended the call and told her she would not have to deal with that problem again. After that, she said Glick never bothered her again and did not even speak to her. Her time with Argent ended when the corporate operation was dismantled under the pressure of skimming investigations. She said the Gaming Control Board treated her as a target for a period and called her to testify. She was eventually dropped from the investigation and was not charged with wrongdoing. After the Argent period, she helped open the Sundance Hotel and Casino in July of 1980 for Mo Dalitz, who owned the property. She described Dalitz as kind and powerful without showing it in his manner. She said those earlier years working under the old structure were the most exciting of her life and described them as a dream experience. She contrasted that era with later mega resorts, arguing that customer service used to be a priority and should remain one. Her story provides a worker's view of how authority and fear could sit inside polished hospitality. It also sets up the next major conflict centered on Rosenthal himself. A few years after Rosenthal moved deeper into the Stardust lane, his background and associations returned as a direct threat to his career. In 1974, he applied for a gaming work card, and key employees were subjected to aggressive background checks. Investigators looked closely at friends and associates, not only at formal records. His relationship to Spilotro and the Chicago outfit became a central issue in the suitability fight. The application was denied at first, then a legal appeal turned the result around. The Nevada Supreme Court upheld a ruling that the denial had been rushed and that he had been deprived of notice and a chance to defend himself. That victory looked like a turning point, but it did not hold for long. The state moved quickly to change the rules and close the door again. Our sources state the legislature responded with a law designed to eliminate the type of contact Rosenthal was using to stay in the casino world without a license. Under the new rule, anyone found unqualified could not be employed by or have contact with a casino licensee, except as an entertainer. He tried to work around it by giving himself a non-gaming title, first as food and beverage director. When that label was rejected, he shifted to entertainment director. He created a weekly variety show taped at the property and aired locally on Saturday evenings. Some viewers described the program as strange, while others described it as poor quality, but it drew attention. He brought on major guests of the era, including Frank Sinatra, O.J. Simpson, and Frankie Valli, along with gambling figures. He also used the platform to attack the gaming control board and mock regulators in public. That publicity created a new problem for the people who preferred the Las Vegas operation to stay quiet. The outfit wanted anonymity, yet the city now had two men generating headlines: Spilotro on the street side and Rosenthal on the public relations side. Nick Civella in Kansas City, receiving money from the skim, was described as worried Rosenthal was getting too close to federal law enforcement and might cooperate if pressure intensified. Regulators and investigators did not accept the claim that his work was confined to entertainment duties, and they treated him as the inside man running real operations, while Glick served as the paper front. Clashes continued through legal maneuvers, public statements, and regulator actions. In June of 1978, the gaming control side again told him his duties required a license. The hearings grew increasingly heated and became public spectacle. He lashed out repeatedly at the commission and its leadership, including Harry Reid, who later became a United States Senator. The result was a career collapse rather than a compromise. He was refused a license outright and was placed in the black book alongside Spilotro. That decision removed him from the casino business and also barred him from setting foot inside gaming properties. Appeals did not reverse the ruling. From the outfit's perspective, the inside man was gone, yet the front ownership lane still existed through Glick, and replacements could be installed. For Rosenthal personally, the loss of access ended the path he had built toward executive authority. The public fights that once looked like strength were now part of the justification for exclusion. Professional failure, however, was not the most dangerous issue forming inside his life. His home situation was already unstable, and the same period made it worse. The personal and the business lanes began colliding. Mafia documents describe the Rosenthal marriage as producing 2 children in the first years, first Stephen and then Stephanie. The family lived with money, status, and the visible comfort that came with his contract and position. On the surface, the household looked nearly ideal, yet his wife was described as unhappy and regretful about the marriage over time. He leaned on his children as relief from professional stress and spent long desert afternoons training them in the family pool. The kids became members of the Las Vegas Sandpiper swim team, and both parents attended meets. He served as the official announcer at tournaments, except during his children's races. When he was pushed out of the casino business in 1978, he publicly framed it as a blessing that gave him more time for his children. That optimism did not fix the deeper problem inside the marriage. His wife's behavior escalated into heavy drinking, drug use, and nights spent away from home. He worried about the strain on the marriage, and also worried about what she might say and to whom she might say it. Rivals could use her for blackmail, and law enforcement had undercover sources constantly probing for usable information. To keep tabs on her movements, he demanded she carry a mobile phone at all times. Her resentment grew, and the surveillance inside the home became part of the conflict. At the same time, Spilotro's behavior in town created additional pressure on Rosenthal's life. He urged his old friend to keep a low profile, yet he was described as doing the opposite and drawing attention. Spilotro also wanted Rosenthal's full support for expansion, and Rosenthal refused, raising tension between the two men. In July of 1978, right after the licensing denial, the marriage entered a new phase of danger. His wife admitted she was having an affair. The lover she named was Spilotro. He understood immediately what the Chicago bosses might do if they learned their Las Vegas enforcer had become involved with the inside man's wife. He made her promise not to tell Spilotro she had confessed, since the disclosure could trigger fear that Rosenthal would complain to Chicago. He also believed Spilotro would assume his life depended on preventing such a complaint. In Rosenthal's telling to her, people who posed a threat to Spilotro often did not live long. He warned her that if Spilotro learned he knew the truth, he might decide to kill both of them. They continued living as if nothing had happened, treating the performance of normal life as a survival measure. The tension between the two men became personal and operational at the same time. Mob historians state Spilotro's reach was not limited to Las Vegas, and the next lane widens towards Southern California. Chicago treated Los Angeles as a region it could influence, even though Los Angeles had its own crime family. That local family was often mocked by outsiders and was tolerated rather than feared, and Chicago did business there on its own terms. This relationship stretched back to the Capone period, when Chicago sent Johnny Rosselli west to handle its interests. Before Rosselli's arrival, Chicago-linked figures had already infiltrated the stage employees' union tied to film production labor. Rosselli settled into Beverly Hills, married actress June Lang, and cultivated friendships with influential industry leaders. One of his known studio relationships was with Columbia Pictures president Harry Cohn, who later testified that Rosselli's presence kept Columbia largely free of labor trouble. Other studios resisted the Chicago approach, and the resistance triggered an extortion attempt framed as labor peace for a price. The amount discussed in the story was around $1 million. Those targeted did not pay quietly and instead reported the demand to law enforcement. Rosselli and an associate, Willie Byoff, were convicted in 1944 and sentenced to 10 years. He was paroled after about 3 years and returned to Hollywood life. He took work as an associate producer and consultant, and the conviction did not end his status in the social network. As legalized gambling grew in Las Vegas, he extended his influence into the desert and added casino relationships to his portfolio. He became known as a person who could get waitresses and dealers hired or fired with a call, and he could have executives removed for failing to show respect. He also became a contact for comps and preferred seating at major properties such as the Dunes and the Flamingo. The image attached to him was consistent: slender build, white hair, and dark glasses, with a reputation as a ladies' man after divorcing Lang. Women linked to him included Judith Exner, who later claimed affairs involving high-profile political and underworld figures. His influence reached into government intrigue as well, since the CIA recruited him and Sam Giancana in 1960 for a plot aimed at killing Fidel Castro. In the 1960s, he remained a central Chicago figure in Los Angeles and retained reach into Las Vegas. The turning point began in 1969, when he was convicted, along with 3 others, in a major card-cheating scheme at the Friars Club in Beverly Hills. The victims included wealthy businessmen and major entertainers, including Theodore Briskin, Zeppo Marx, Phil Silvers, and Tony Martin. The conviction carried a 5-year prison sentence. Around that time, he was also called before a federal grand jury, probing mob influence in Las Vegas casinos. He was granted immunity and claimed he told the grand jury nothing. Our sources state even the appearance of loose lips could be fatal in that world, and Chicago began doubting him after related figures ended up jailed. He was released from prison in 1973 and tried to re-establish himself by leaning on Los Angeles gangsters he had tolerated and befriended for years. The local family was described as too small to help, with only about a dozen members compared to the hundreds in other major city families. He also knew that while he was incarcerated, a new figure had moved into Las Vegas and taken the lane he once controlled. He turned to a former West Coast enforcer, Aladina, Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, hoping he could help him regain ground. Fratiano was also on the outs with organized crime and could not restore Rosselli's status. A dinner conversation between the two men in Los Angeles in 1974 captured Rosselli's frustration. Fratiano told him Spilotro now handled the arbitration role in Las Vegas and was also running loans and burglary crews, and Rosselli responded with contempt, calling him classless and framing him as an enforcer, taking orders from Joe Aiuppa. Rosselli disappeared from his sister's home in Florida on July 28, 1976, and 10 days later, his remains were found in Biscayne Bay inside a 55-gallon drum. Investigators noted his legs had been removed to fit the body into the container. The killing was never solved. Whatever the motive, the result helped Spilotro by removing the last major Chicago-aligned figure in Southern California who could undermine his authority. With Rosselli gone, no comparable elder remained in the region to challenge him. Fratiano's own behavior then created a separate headache for Chicago, since he became loud and reckless. He bragged about being the toughest mobster in California and created a tension that bosses did not want. One intimidation story described him placing a dead fish in a Beverly Hills lawyer's mailbox to send a message. He was summoned to Chicago for a face-to-face with Aiuppa and told to clean up his conduct, then allowed to return west. He did not follow the warning and instead boasted about hustling money from wealthy Las Vegas gamblers who were described as old friends of Chicago leadership. Chicago decided he had become an unacceptable risk and concluded he had to be eliminated. By 1977, he believed he was marked and refused attempts to lure him back to Chicago. A call urging him to step into a phone booth for a confidential message struck him as a trap, and he refused to move into the open. Federal agents had him under surveillance and also believed he was near the end of the line. They approached him with a direct choice: cooperate and enter witness protection, or wait for a hit team. He abandoned the silence code and became a government witness. In an April 1978 interview, he said Spilotro had offered $10,000 to keep him from giving information against mob figures, with promises of more later, yet the money never arrived, when he asked that it be routed through his lawyer. He also told agents he believed Spilotro intended to kill him, and his cooperation opened a second front in the federal push against Tony. Mob historians state that in New York, John Gotti built a reputation as Teflon by slipping convictions until federal racketeering law finally caught him, and he ended life without parole. In Las Vegas, Tony Spilotro never held the top title of any family, yet the attention on him was described as nearly constant and nearly as intense. He was treated as a suspect in roughly 24 murders, along with a long list of other felonies. But for more than a decade, he avoided being convicted of even minor charges. Some accounts argue that was criminal skill, others say it was the fear he inspired in potential witnesses. And a third factor kept coming up: his lawyer, Oscar Goodman. Goodman arrived in Las Vegas in the mid-1960s, opened a practice, and quickly became one of the city's best-known criminal defense attorneys. Goodman's client list tells the story of how close he was to the biggest cases of that era. He represented a federal judge later convicted of tax evasion and removed by the United States Senate, and he also represented Alan Glick and the corporate group tied to major casinos. He represented Frank Rosenthal and Tony Spilotro, and he attacked law enforcement aggressively in court and outside court, making himself a public figure rather than a quiet counselor. He was known as a fighter, and his opponents described him as relentless. Quotes attributed to him in later writing captured his public posture, including a line about preferring his daughter date Spilotro over an FBI agent, and the blunt claim that there was no mob. Whether those statements reflected his private beliefs or were tactical, people close to Rosenthal, Glick, and Spilotro took them as useful cover and a show of loyalty. Sources state that what made the pairing dangerous for prosecutors was not only talk, but results. Each man brought a different toolset. One ran street discipline and intimidation, the other fought in court and on television, and together they made cases difficult to finish. Even then, Spilotro's life was not presented as non-stop violence, and people who watched him in everyday settings said he also lived like a husband and father. A former Las Vegas television reporter put it bluntly: he did not spend every hour doing criminal work. To explore that private lane, later interviews were done with Nancy Spilotro and their son Vincent, with an agreement that business details would not be discussed. That limitation shaped what they were willing to describe, and it also revealed how the family wanted him remembered. Nancy described him as a routine home man who liked meals cooked at home, and she said they rarely ate out. She said his own cooking was basic and mostly meant making their son breakfast, pancakes being the main example. They did not spend much time on the strip unless they had a specific show to see, or they were guiding visitors from out of town. The family made trips to Disneyland, and she named his favorite ride and his favorite movie, details meant to show a normal side. She said he was not handy around the house and did not act like a person trying to project luxury. They lived comfortably, but she described it as not flashy. Vincent remembered growing up with the benefits and the tension that came with his father's name. He talked about river trips, sometimes with casino owners, and other times as simple drives around town with just the two of them. He described him as generous and give neighborhood kids advice, and he also recalled nights when he could not sleep well and wanted his son's arm around him to settle down. The son also remembered federal raids and a shooting at the house when he was 14, with the family home and Uncle John's house attacked the same night. Pellets came close enough to frighten him, property was damaged, and no one was charged. He and his mother believed police were responsible, an accusation that shows how little trust existed in their world. Mob historians state that the father's reputation shaped school life in a way that did not resemble an ordinary student's experience. Vincent said other kids knew who his father was and treated him with caution, and he joked that he could not even get into a fight if he tried. He said girlfriends did not dare him, and sometimes his father brought celebrities, including actor Robert Conrad, to his baseball games, which made the son a local attraction by association. A teacher later said he was quiet, polite, and did not draw attention, more shy than disruptive. Vincent also described living by a silence rule. If he knew someone had done wrong, he would not tell on them. He said his father sometimes warned him that a classmate's parent was an informant and told him to be careful. Then the larger question returned: was he a brutal enforcer or a devoted family man, or both? And accounts of the time answered that it depended on where you stood. The story then turns from the personal lane to the law lane, where the city itself was changing fast. By the late 1970s, the Las Vegas Valley had grown past 400,000 residents, and yearly tourist totals had climbed to around 11 million, nearly double the number from earlier in the decade. Construction surged, housing spread outward, and the small-town feel began to disappear under constant new arrivals and cash. Local policing had also changed structure, with the city department and the county sheriff's department merging on July 1st, 1973, to form the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Metro covered a vast jurisdiction, including Las Vegas and most of Clark County. The merger started rough, with rivalries, budget problems, and officers still wearing old uniforms and carrying old sidearms while driving older vehicles, the opposite of unity. Sheriff Ralph Lamb became the head of the merged agency, and he already held deep political influence in the state. His second was Under-Sheriff John Moran, a former Las Vegas chief, and the consolidation itself stayed unpopular with many officers and politicians. Even after morale improved and equipment stabilized, political attempts to break Metro back apart kept returning. Rumors of corruption inside the department circulated, and the rumors spread all the way up to the sheriff himself. In 1977, Lamb was indicted for income tax evasion, with allegations that he spent more than he earned and accepted loans from casino owner Benny Binion that were never meant to be repaid. He was later acquitted, but the damage to the department's image lingered. For some commanders inside Metro, that image problem became the reason to act. Our sources state John McCarthy decided the only way to restore credibility was to challenge Lamb directly, even though Lamb was treated as nearly unbeatable. McCarthy was born March 4, 1934, in Weehawken, New Jersey, lost his father at 7, and worked as a kid to help get by, selling papers and shining shoes. He worked a factory job while attending high school, paid his mother for room and board, saved enough to buy a car, and then took a better-paying job at a General Motors plant. With the Korean War still active, he enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1953, trained in infantry, and later was stationed in Nevada, guarding some of the nation's most dangerous weapons. He fell in love during that tour, left the service in February of 1956, returned to New Jersey briefly, and came back to Las Vegas within months. A chance conversation with a former Marine buddy, who was now a cop, led him to apply, and by September 13, 1956 he was hired, issued used uniforms, loaned a revolver, handcuffs and gear, and paid $360 a month with no overtime. He married a nurse in January of 1958, had 2 sons, moved into detective work by 1961, and later credited a simple study method learned from a childhood friend, writing questions and answers on small cards, for helping him climb ranks steadily through the department. By 1977, he was disillusioned with leadership, not only because of the IRS investigation, but also because he saw conflicts of interest around liquor and gaming decisions and business contracts tied to political relationships. He also heard rumors that some intelligence officers were on the mob payroll, and he believed the department's standing with citizens and other agencies was at risk. He decided to run for sheriff in the 1978 election and asked for help from Gary Lang, a Las Vegas native who had become a criminal defense attorney after time as a police cadet, Army service, college, and law school. Lang later recalled being asked to close the door for a private talk, hearing McCarthy say he was running, and realizing immediately there was no way to talk him out of it. He agreed to advise the campaign, and McCarthy secured Republican Party support in April, filed the next month, and ran as a reform candidate, promising to restore Metro's reputation. In November, he defeated Lamb, and the win was real. But people around him said the celebration did not last, and the real problems began immediately after.